Welcome to the studio here in Paris at the show formerly known as European Utility Week and POWERGEN Europe. Paddy, what's the new name?
Enlit.
Enlit. That's interesting. There were two well-recognized brands here. Why change?
POWERGEN was created 30 years ago. European Utility Week, or the Utility Week brand, was 7 years ago. So the market is changing. And essentially, if we want to create an end-to-end event, we need a contemporary name, and that's why we did the work, and Enlit was chosen.
Enlit.
What's the next step for the group, Duncan?
Clarion Energy runs about 40 events, and we're looking at which ones of those events are actually going to take on the Enlit brand. We're delighted that we're announcing here in Europe that Europe is becoming Enlit. Our Asian portfolio, which next takes place in Jakarta, is going to be Enlit, and our co-located events in Melbourne and Australia are also going to be coming Enlit. Those three markets, Southeast Asia, Australia and Europe, actually as far as the energy transition goes, are quite developed markets. Those are the three natural events that are first going to change. I think you've seen at the event today, over the last couple of days, how busy it is here. Three big themes: decarbonisation, decentralisation and digitalisation are also very big themes at the Asian and the Australian event. So it's a natural evolution for those events all to change at the same time. And then I think over the next 12 months we'll continue to look and research the markets or other continents that our events take place in, and those brands will become Enlit as well.
Paddy, there's obviously been a long journey to get here.
Yeah.
What's the story behind the brand?
The story behind the brand, essentially, it's not something that we just went out and said, okay, we'll change the name. We used a company called Clarion Energy branding. That's all they do. They look at and work with energy companies, they work with utilities, they just focus on branding of energy. And we basically handled the process, had faith in his process. So we've researched visitor groups, exhibitor groups, internal, we had internal workshops, and essentially he went through the building the brand and where we wanted to go by analysing where we were, how the events were viewed, and where we wanted to go in the future. And part of that process obviously was the name, and everyone seems to be sort of hung up on the name, but it is important. But the reality is a brand is far more than the name itself. So he's built layers and elements that we want to do, and I think the thing that we're going to be living with for the next years is that, unlike other events, we want to create something very different. What came out of the research was the fact that we have a very strong, rational connection with our audience. We have a very loyal audience. They love our content, they like what we do. If you just look around here for the first day and a half, you can see that interaction. We need to develop this emotional element, this emotional connection, and then we will become a real brand. Emotionalize energy, and I think that's what's needed. So that's how it's evolved, and now it's just the start of this journey to create this so-called end-to-end event, but it's something we need to make it unlike other events.
Duncan, that's an interesting point. Unlike other events, something new that the world hasn't seen before.
That's right, yeah, and I think it's important at our events, and you'll see this very much at the Enlit events going forward. We're looking to connect the visitors with the exhibitors and with each other so they can share as much information and knowledge as possible. We're looking to inspire the audience and the visitors to the show and the exhibitors to the show, and we're looking to evolve both our event and also businesses and consumers' use of energy in the future. So we're hoping that over the next couple of years these events really can evolve and actually help the industry as much as possible through the energy transition.
Paddy, how do you see this event evolving?
I think that's a very good question, because we talk about end-to-end, but what does that really mean? And I think for us, it's really looking at sort of multi-fuel systems. If you look at the role that gas can play, you look at the hybrid generation, then you look at the transmission distribution aspect. It is end-to-end, but I think the most important thing that we need to look at is if you look at, say, the generation aspect, that we are generation agnostic. We are not a wind show, we are not a solar show, we are not a hydro show, we are not a gas show, we are everything. So it is a case of building capacity, and that capacity is leading from the carbonised aspect. Gas is going to be very important in every element, but working its way through to building renewable capacity. So on the generation side, that's very important. But we look at the networks, which is the gas network, we're looking at the electricity networks, we're looking at the digital networks, and we're looking at the heating and cooling element. So really that for us is the important thing, that we are totally inclusive, but we are focusing on all aspects. And I think from the feedback that we've had from the audience, that is very important. Break down these silos, get involved with sector coupling, and get these different areas talking to each other, because that is where the magic happens. That is where we're going to accelerate the energy transition.
And I was going to say, if I can add on that, and I think globally as well, the position we see on each of the shows is ever so slightly different. You know, each nation or continent has got a slightly different energy mix and has slightly different issues as they make their way through, you know, whether it's gas or LNG or whatever it might be. And we hope that by creating these inclusive guides for the energy transition, each one in each area will be slightly different, but they'll all help the local utility or the commercial industrial user to understand where they get their energy use from.
Enlit, it sounds more like an experience than a show. We'll see you in Milan next year for the first ever edition of Enlit Europe.